Before we begin proper, I'd like you all to process this next sentence with an open mind. Arcane is the worst video game adaptation of all time, because unlike the game it's based on, it doesn't make me want to bludgeon myself. That's your League of Legends joke for the video. What am I saying? I mean misfortune, I'm the one causing the statistics to rise. Very rarely does a show come along that just shatters every expectation. Every preconceived notion, every prediction, every single bloody thing shattered in pieces. Now, I'm not exactly someone who's hard to impress. I cried watching Look Back, and I think Shadow the Hedgehog is unironically cool, but even if I'm blown away and absolutely love something, it will likely never even come close to breaking into my top 10 favorite things ever made across TV, film, and video games. I'll just come out and say it. Arcane is one of the best shows I have ever watched. Period. I have watched it over and over and over and over and over again because no matter how many times I finished that first season, I just crave for more. More of this world, more of this breathtaking animation, more of these characters, more of this delicately and meticulously planned story that immerses me for hours on end. It occupies all of the important parts of my brain so I forget to do taxes for 7 months, whoops. Arcane is a masterclass of not just video game adaptations, but of storytelling and television in general. It's a show anyone can watch, League fan, assuming those do exist, or otherwise. It makes no compromises for casual audiences or longtime fans. It just does. And let me tell you, that wait for season 2, that was hard. And knowing I wasn't even able to watch it as it first premiered because I was preoccupied with making this f***ing thing was even harder. But now I'm up to date. As of writing today, I am waiting along with everyone with bated breath to see if Arcane season 2 sticks the landing when Act 3 drops. And when it does drop, I'll rewrite and change some things in this video to suit the overall conclusion before I release it, along with including Act 3 in my section on season 2. Arcane is truly one of a kind, and I honestly don't mind that there's going to be more League of Legends shows exploring the many other parts of the game's lore, because as wild as Arcane is with what it chooses to focus on, it hasn't even scratched the surface of how crazy a League's lore is. But to get back on track, now that the series is finally over, I felt a full retrospective was in order. I have held off talking about Arcane, brief mentions notwithstanding, for so long, and a review of the whole package seems like the perfect excuse to finally do so. I don't want to go super Joseph Anderson in depth with this, but I really want an excuse to finally gush about everything I love about this absolute writer's flex of a TV show. I have no clue how long this is going to be, but if you need to take breaks, then by all means do so. With that out of the way, this is Arcane, a full series retrospective. Hey, I made it this far and I've only made 2 jokes at League's expense, so this video is better than everyone else's by default. I've recommended Arcane to a lot of people, and their first reactions to that recommendation are always a joy to look back on after they finish the series and start gushing in my DMs about how great it was. No one ever goes into this show blind with that many expectations, and those that do know about the game it's based on are usually going to have their expectations set below the floor. It feels weird to praise an adaptation of a video game for not really being much of an adaptation. There's obviously a ton of elements of League of Legends within Arcane, but I struggle to call the show itself a video game adaptation despite it being one by technicality. I really love that Arcane, first and foremost, is a TV show anyone can pick up, watch, and understand without any outside sources being necessary to improve the experience. Obviously, having some knowledge or being a League player will make certain things more impactful, name drops, plot twists, reveals in general, but the impact of all of these things can still be felt by the average viewer thanks to how absolutely incredible Arcane is at immersing you in its world and how great it is at world building in general, along with getting you to care about the characters in such a short amount of time. What a lot of shows tend to forget before they begin dumping heaps of exposition onto the viewer is that you need to make sure your audience cares and has reasons to care. There's no point in getting invested in a world that feels artificial, like an afterthought that's trying too hard to win your approval and attention. Arcane's world building and character introductions feel natural. Piltover feels like a place that has existed far before the concept of League of Legends was even finalized, and before the first words of Arcane's script were even written. The harsh juxtaposition between Piltover and Zorn and how different lives of their people are, given the intense class divide, getting to see the the politics of this place firsthand as the councilors struggle to maintain order and peace between the two, while the citizens of Zorn begin to rise up against their neglect and oppression. Having the story focus on two sets of characters, one set struggling to survive in the harsh conditions of Zorn, and in the paradise above them, the other set are struggling to make a name for themselves and improve the world through science. Each character has their own beliefs, goals, and morals to help set them apart, while also making them all feel like real people who live in a real world, all of which are understandable at a bare minimum. Arcane is a very morally complicated show, and at times you may not have a firm grasp of who you want to root for. Characters you love can do things you strongly disagree with or hate them for doing. Characters who you thought were completely irredeemable bastards that you love to hate will have moments where you can understand what they're feeling or just genuinely feel sorry for them. The story is dripping with tragedy. Just about everyone has their own tragic story to tell that helps them justify why they do what they do or why they see the world the way they see it. And that alone helps to make the audience care about what they're watching. While Vi and Jinx may get most of the spotlight and have most of the story center around them and their struggles, Jason Victor's story is just as engaging and helps to immerse the viewer of the balance between the top side and bottom side stories. Arcane, from the get-go, understands the assignment and makes its main mission throughout the first episode to create a world that doesn't just hook, but immerses you, populated by completely believable characters. It is determined to make you care by the time the credits of episode 1 start rolling, and I've yet to meet a person that the show has failed to impress on that front. All of this world building is of course bolstered by Arcane's absolutely breathtaking animation and art direction. I'll try not to spend too long gushing about it, as one of the main things people have consistently praised about Arcane is just how f***ing fantastic it looks. But to call this show good looking is a disservice that should have you tried in court with God as your judge. Arcane is a visual marvel that perfectly blends 2D and 3D animation together, take a shot every time you hear me say that on this channel, to create a unique visual aesthetic that is entirely its own. Obviously, with the recent boom of visually experimental animated movies and TV shows, there will be similarities between all of them, as they use a lot of the same techniques, but Arcane's visual style is very distinct. Most people like to focus on the action sequences and all the cool explosions, Jinx's hallucinations, all of this super bombastic stuff that you can look at and immediately go, damn, yeah, that's impressive. But what really sells me on Arcane's animation is how it assists the show's world building and atmosphere. Every scene in this show is so expertly detailed, helping to emphasize that this is a real world that these characters actually live in and are influenced by and influence themselves. The clean streets, striking architecture, and clear steampunk influence of Piltover really sells how much of a glowing beacon of progress it's touted up as, and makes it look like a golden paradise compared to the green, murky depths of Zorn. Overcrowded with plenty of unfriendly faces and shady activities, the buildings are far more twisty and decorated with neon lights. The sanitization of topside is replaced by what is essentially a lawless hellhole, controlled only by gangs looking for any scraps of power they can find down there. Every corner you can see the effects of the council's neglect, and despite this, it's still gorgeous to look at while selling the vibes flawlessly. Nearly every frame of this show is worthy of being framed in a bloody museum. The artistry on display is absolutely mind-blowing, and I don't care how much people say it because it's true. All of the praise is deserved. So we've gone over how insanely good this show is at making you care about its world and characters, and we know the show is visual crack, but what about the specifics? Season 1 of Arcane, as previously mentioned, jumps back and forth between two stories, the story of Vi and Jinx and the story of Victor and Jace, including all of the other characters important to their stories and their eventual overlap. Act 1 focuses on the events leading up to Vi and Jinx's world collapsing and them separating, along with Jace and Victor making scientific strides and introducing the world to Hextech, while also being the most blatant definition of doomed yaoi I have ever seen. Both of these stories are very compelling, but there's no denying that most people are watching Arcane for Vi and Jinx, and their story is definitely the most engaging. Seeing how much their found family unit cares for each other, Vander struggling with being pressured to give up his children for everyone's safety, seeing Powder trying desperately to be useful and to help out her family, only to be judged every time she screws up, being the catalyst for her complete descent into insanity and the birth of Jinx, and how all of this culminates with episode 3's heart-wrenching ending where you finally think everything is gonna be alright, only to watch in horror as everything gets jinxed. They spend so much time building up to Powder finally being able to help out her family and for her explosives to actually work, and the absolute dread you feel when they finally do at the worst possible time is paralyzing. Her family is destroyed when all she wanted to do was help. It effectively drills into your head so early on that if you ever think a happy outcome is possible in Arcane, you're dead wrong. Everything in this show is a tragedy, yet thanks to how well it's all built up, you're always caught off guard whenever things go wrong. While what's happening with Jace and Victor doesn't even come close to being as grim and sad, it still tells an effective story about the creation of Hextech and the growing bond between the two. Arcane Act 1 is so packed with content that it could genuinely be its own season, but this is just the beginning. Acts 2 and 3 take place roughly 7 years after the events of Act 1, and explore Vi trying to find and reconnect with Powder, now going by Jinx, while Jace and Victor face numerous struggles in the world of politics and lose sight of their original goal to help make the world a better place and to help those in need. Both stories also overlap far more frequently before culminating in the final stretch of Act 3. This time around, while I'm still mostly here for Vi and Jinx, Jace and Victor's story is much more of a political thriller, which is right up my alley when it comes to storytelling. Jace is thrusted into being a member of the council and eventually the de facto leader of Piltover, and we get to see him struggle with the newfound responsibility when it comes to keeping the peace between the top and bottom sides. Zorn grows more restless and violent by the day as the council continues to neglect and oppress them, with Jinx being responsible for the vast majority of terrorist attacks and disturbing the peace. No, restrain. Meanwhile, Victor's declining health has left him with limited time, and his desire to keep living and the lengths he goes to find a cure grow more and more desperate. Oh yeah, there's also Vi and Caitlyn with their doomed Yuri. I'm sensing a pattern here. Vi trying to reconnect with Powder after all this time is probably the saddest part of the show. Realizing too late that while Powder may be in there somewhere, it's just Jinx now on the outside, and she's too far gone. Jinx herself walks a fine line with her antics being darkly amusing, but also really hard to watch knowing what she was like before her old life fell apart. It's probably the best example of the show taking the relatively flat personalities or things you could gauge from a character in League of Legends and turning them into a fully realized three-dimensional character. All of Jinx's iconic quirks, which may have made you crack a smile or two when you hear her speak in-game, are now heart-wrenching with Arcane's additional context, the product of a broken and traumatized mind. The moment where Vi and Jinx reunite in episode 6 and the first thing she does is ask Vi if she's real cuts so deep and says so much. She can't trust anything she sees. We see her hallucinate several times throughout the show, haunted by the deaths of Milo, Clagger, and Vander. Despite all of the terrible things Jinx has done, from all of her attacks on Piltover, the number of innocents she's killed, everything, you can't help but feel sorry for her and hope that anyone will give her the love and help she needs, even if you know it's futile. At the same time, she's caused so much damage and hurt and killed so many that you also want her to actually face justice and to be stopped. Nothing in Arcane is black and white, and I love how it makes my thoughts about every character's actions so complicated, and that extends to the main antagonist for Season 1, Silco. I know it's taken me a while to mention Silco, but it's because he absolutely flourishes in Acts 2 and 3. In Act 1, while his history with Vander is intriguing and he's a very effective and ruthless villain, there wasn't a whole lot else you could get from him. 7 years later though, and we get to see a lot more sides to Silco. While he's still a calm, collected, and very menacing antagonistic force, his relation to Jinx finally gives him a weakness that opens his eyes to the troubles Vander was facing that he initially wrote off. While his adoption of Jinx and his less than stellar treatment of her that led to the complete decay of her psyche, and the way he uses her to take care of his enemies gives the impression that he's only using her for his own gain, and to be fair, he is doing that to an extent, it becomes abundantly clear that he legitimately cares for her and sees her as his daughter. It's an incredibly f***ed up dynamic, but seeing Silco openly care about Jinx, panicking when there's a chance she's about to die, struggling to give her up for the prosperity of everyone in Zorn, it's somehow enough to make you care about him, or at the very least pity him. He's a terrible person and his actions are detestable, and yet here I am feeling sorry for him as he sits under Vander's statue, his former brother, the man he mocked for valuing his children's lives and safety over the greater good of his people. He sits there, finally understanding what Vander was going through. Jace had just offered him everything he ever wanted, a deal that would only lose him problems and guarantee a better future for his people, all in exchange for Jinx, and he can't do it. Even when Jinx accidentally kills him, in his dying breath he tells her he would have never given her up, not for anything. Silco ended up being one of my favorite characters. He's so well written and so interesting. It's hard not to avert your eyes and attention whenever he's on screen. Season 1's finale is quite literally an explosive conclusion, and despite the season's short length of only 9 episodes, it feels like you've just watched a full 20 episode season's worth of content. And that's thanks to Arcane's amazing pacing and how well it manages to cram several episodes worth of stuff into a single 40-minute showstopper, 9 times in a row. There are so many characters with their own stories happening while the main plot is constantly moving. I can see it being a little overwhelming for some, but I think they get it just right without anything feeling rushed or unearned. I guess I could talk for longer about what I appreciate with so many other characters like Heimerdinger and Echo, who both get plenty of time to shine despite everything happening around them. That fight scene between Echo and Jinx is one of the most popular scenes in the show for a reason, and it's not just because it looks absolutely beautiful. It tells us so much about Jinx and Echo's friendship when they were kids that we weren't able to see in Act 1. This is basically our first time seeing how strong their bond used to be, and despite how short that glimpse is, I completely buy how hard this fight is for Echo, and his hesitation when Powder breaks through Jinx and stares him in the face. They managed to do so much in a scene that lasts only 2 minutes, and none of it feels rushed. Even someone like Heimerdinger, who doesn't doesn't get much screen time after he's booted off the council, gets a good couple of scenes, from him trying to offer his assistance to the people of Zorn and seeing firsthand what life is like down there, his meeting with Echo and seeing how much progress he's made in such a short amount of time. Everyone in Arcane gets the right amount of attention they deserve. It makes the show very easy for anyone to watch, giving them so much to chew on while not having that many episodes. Even after seeing season 2, I still have a lot of respect for how masterfully handled every aspect of Arcane season 1 is. It's pitch perfect, and I can't find any moment where it really falters, besides Victor accidentally killing Skye given she wasn't really much of a character. It's still an effective moment for Victor, but I would have liked to have seen more of her so I could actually care about her death a bit, and that's the only scene out of 9 episodes that I think is somewhat flawed. Arcane season 1 is still my favorite out of the two, but even with that in mind, I was not ready for what season 2 had in store. The Season 2 section will be split into 2 parts. This part, which I'm writing before the release of Act 3, and then my thoughts on Act 3 after I've seen it. Arcane's second season immediately hits the ground running and refuses to stop, picking up and showing us the aftermath of Jinx's destruction. Half of the council lie dead, including Caitlyn's mother. The irony of them almost brokering peace with the Undercity only to be attacked instantly is not lost on the survivors, and the tensions between Piltover and Zorn are higher than ever before. Season 2 has a lot on its plate, so many characters to keep track of who each have their own agendas, and while it may falter a little at some points compared to how stable the previous season was, this is still an absolute marvel of storytelling and an impressive feat given how much there is to cover. Everything positive I had to say about season 1 also applies to season 2, except now everything is bigger. The scope is bigger, there's more action, things happen faster, the plot is constantly moving and the characters are always put in difficult situations. Caitlyn is reeling from the death of her mother as she vows to bring Jinx to justice, with Vi joining her and making the tough and hard choice to join the Enforcers. Vi joining the Enforcers may feel a little rushed, and some people have claimed it's out of character, especially given how Vi's hatred of them has been made clear previously, being responsible for the deaths of her and Powder's biological parents. But I thought that it being rushed was very much the point. She completely refuses Caitlyn's original offer to join for this exact reason, offended at the idea of assisting the very people that killed her parents. But after the attack at the memorial service, Vi sees firsthand the floodgates that Jinx has opened. The people of Zorn see her as a symbol of rebellion, a title that she doesn't care much for, but the unrest is becoming more and more violent by the day, with people finding the strength to riot against Piltover's leadership because of Jinx's consistent terrorist attacks. Both Jinx's attacks and the influence she has over Zorn citizens have made her a legitimate threat that needs to be stopped. Coupling this with Vi's relationship with Caitlyn and her hasty decision to join the Enforcers specifically to put a stop to Jinx's antics makes complete sense. It's meant to be an uncomfortable decision for her, and I love that they handled it with this much grace. You can really feel how much the atmosphere has changed this season, especially when we go back to Zorn and see what Jinx is up to. We see the people of Zorn view her as a savior, a symbol. People start dyeing their hair blue and riot against their oppression, given newfound strength after she blew up the council. And it's interesting to see how she reacts to all of this. She's completely unfazed and doesn't seem to really get it until it's staring her in the face. While it's not immediately obvious until the conclusion to episode 3, it becomes clear to anyone paying attention that Jinx is suicidal. She no longer cares about anything she's doing and sees no problem of killing anyone in her way or just on a whim, continuing to emphasize that Powder is gone and that only Jinx remains. But over the course of a few episodes, things start to change a bit. Another thing to mention in regard to Jinx's story is Isha, a little girl that starts following Jinx around after she saves her life in episode 2. Seemingly having no family of her own and being completely non-verbal, she grows attached to Jinx, and eventually Jinx starts caring for her too, giving her a second shot at sisterhood where she's the older sibling, directly mirroring her relationship with Vi all those years ago. Despite Jinx's descent into madness, Isha helps to keep her grounded and starts getting her to care again. Despite how odd their dynamic is to begin with, it blossoms into a sibling relationship that's ultimately healthy for Jinx. I was a little mixed on Isha at first, because it felt like she sort of came out of nowhere and then within one episode she's throwing herself onto Jinx to protect her from being shot. It felt like we should have had a bit more time with her and Jinx to have the impact of this moment land better, but as the episodes go on, you see Jinx go from being almost emotionless and completely apathetic to being full of life and enjoying her time with Isha. While she's still a loose cannon, she finally has something in her life worth caring for and protecting again. And this is only strengthened when Fucking Warwick, you have ruined too many of my evenings. Vander is alive, brought back from the brink by Singed and turned into a violent, unhinged beast that single-handedly keeps keyboard manufacturers afloat across the globe. That's the final League of Legends joke, I swear. Seeing Jinx, Vi, and Vander reunite, even if it is only for a short while, was incredibly powerful. While I would have loved to have more time with them, and I do think they go through everything a bit too fast for my liking, I loved this so much. The promise of them being able to rebuild their family, Jinx being on the verge of actually getting better, it's all too perfect, and when it all inevitably goes downhill, and both Vander and Isha are stripped away from her, you realize that things are never going to be the same again. I loved this so much, even though I knew things weren't going to go the way I and basically everyone in the show wanted, and that something was going to go wrong. This was an emotionally gratifying arc. Seeing Jinx go from having no regard for her life at all to finally being close to a genuine happy ending, only for it all to be ripped away at the last possible second. Cinema, like, but of course there's still a lot going on in season 2. While Heimerdinger and Echo are kinda stuck in the act-free waiting room right now, Jace and Victor still have a lot going on. Victor being cured of his illness and being able to heal people, and also finally says the thing, glorious evolution. Singed continuing his streak of ruining absolutely everything with no consequence, and Bessa slowly taking control, everything going on with Mel and the Black Rose. Jace coming back after being absent for a good while, visibly having gone through some serious hell in his time away, then shocking the fuck out of everyone by killing Victor and leading to the loss of Vander and Isha. It's a lot. And honestly, you can really feel it. Now, some of you may be wondering why exactly I prefer Season 1 over 2. I did talk about it a little just a second ago, but I'll get into it in more detail now. Before I say anything, I do want to make it clear that these are two of the greatest seasons of television I have watched in years, and when it comes to overall quality, they are second to none. I love Arcane Season 2, but it's got some problems that I think some people are ignoring. Arcane has always had incredibly fast pacing, and every episode of the show is stuffed to the brim with content that most shows would cover in 3 times the amount of episodes. That stays true for Season 2, but at some points it does feel like Season 2 could have used a bit more time. Like, even as little as a single extra episode could have helped. There was a rumor floating around about Arcane initially being planned out as a 5-season TV show that was dismissed by the creators, but part of me does feel like Season 2 is trying its best to condense like 2 seasons worth of content at once. Most of the time, which is like 95% of the time, it works out pretty well. That other 5% though is pretty noticeable, mostly with Act 2. The plot starts to move a lot faster, and at least to some things not feeling as natural as I've come to expect from this show. I feel like we should have had more time with Isha before she tried taking a bullet for Jinx. I feel like we should have had more time with Vander before immediately taking him away. Caitlyn's reaction to seeing Jinx in episode 6 was very unusual given how all previous episodes this season showed that she was bloody determined to kill Jinx after the death of her mother, to the point that she fired a shot at a child that was protecting her. The Black Rose coming out of nowhere is definitely not much of a surprise, but it still feels like a rather underdeveloped plot point given everything else currently going on in the story, which also emphasizes just how many characters and plotlines Arcane Season 2 is juggling. The fact this season is still mind-blowingly fantastic is, well, mind-blowing, but I think it says a lot that so much happened in Act 2 specifically, that by the time Jace reappeared, I'd straight up forgotten he was a character. There is so much going on and it's handled impressively, but you can feel the show struggling a lot more than it did in Season 1. Another thing I think it was handled better in Season 1 was the show's tendency to become a music video at points. The animation and music of Arcane are top-notch, and the way the show uses its soundtrack for these short music video sequences is pretty cool most of the time. But even in Season 1, there were points where it bordered on being a little self-indulgent. Season 2 doesn't have anything as blatant as Imagine Dragons literally showing up to start singing Enemy and scaring the hoes away, but Season 2 does have far more of these, to the point where they stop being cool ways to set the stage or convey emotions, and just seem to be music videos for the sake of having a music video. The most blatant example is probably the start of episode 4. I love Paint the Town Blue, I think it's an excellent song, but there's barely any actual animation here, nor is there any substance beyond it being a way to set up the time skip and show us snippets of Caitlyn's enforcers trying to call the civil unrest and so on. Now, with all of that said, these are not gigantic problems and still don't change the fact that this is an excellent season of television, but because of how pitch perfect that first season was, it makes these smaller problems a lot more noticeable, and it's why I prefer the first season as an overall package. But episode 6 is goated, so that basically makes up for it. Acts 1 and 2 of Arcane's second season are incredible, and I hope that the next time I come back to working on this video, I'll be gushing about how Act 3 managed to stick the landing and solidify this show as one of the greats. yeah, they kind of f***ing cooked. Where do I even begin with Act 3? Well, I guess I could get some complaints out of the way first. Act 3 takes the pacing issues I had with Act 2 and sorta amplifies them. This mostly applies to episode 9, though episodes 7 and 8 also feel incredibly fast. I strongly believe that if Arcane had 1 or 2 more episodes to wrap up everything, all my complaints here would be null and void. There is so much to process here that it's overwhelming, but at the same time, the things that happen in these last 3 episodes are nothing short of crazy. Some of the most gorgeous animation in the entire show. The tension was so high, my heart was practically jumping out of my throat at times, and when it comes to wrapping up everything that it needed to, I think that this is likely the best finale they could have made given the circumstances, and it's a great finale in general. I was very satisfied with the result, but yes, some things do just feel unnatural here. Episode 7 is probably among the top 3 best episodes of the show. We finally get to see Echo and Heimerdinger again, and we also see what caused Jace to chart a course towards Victor like a man possessed. Echo and Heimerdinger end up in an alternate universe where Piltover prospered, Vi had died, and Jinx, along with basically everyone else, was still alive. What happens here was fairly predictable if you've seen an episode of a TV show where a character miraculously takes the place of their alternate self in a different universe. But the execution was both cool and heartbreaking from beginning to end. But while these two were in what was essentially paradise, Jace was in hell, seeing the destroyed state of a world only possible because of the creation of Hextech and Victor's hive mind. Both of these plots were fantastic, but Heimerdinger's death comes so out of left field. Like, it makes sense, he had to act fast and stay behind to ensure Echo could return to the correct universe, and him telling Echo how he's been able to truly live ever since they met was very touching. But forgive me for saying this, I found their relationship to be a little underdeveloped. They only met during the last 2 episodes of season 1 and had very few scenes together. Then they disappear for a good chunk of season 2, and once they do reappear, Heimer is sacrificing himself, and it's like, we know they've spent plenty of time together, but we haven't seen much of it. That's a little bit of a downside of how focused Arcane can be. Because it's always laser focused on the story, we rarely get moments of downtime where we can deepen our understanding and love of the characters. Just a little bit more of that would have helped to sell the impact of this scene. Regardless, episode 7 had my eyes glued to the screen from start to finish, and it's definitely one of my favorites. Episode 8 is mostly set up for the finale. All the characters have wrapped up their individual journeys, and now all that lies ahead is the upcoming battle. Mel finally has control of her powers, Victor is now the main threat as his glorious evolution has led him astray, focusing on perfection and creating a hive mind that Ambessa will use in her army, and Vi and Kate finally break the doomed Yuri curse, which I cannot show you on YouTube, but every Kate Vi account on Twitter was cheering, I assure you. And then we have episode 9, the final episode, and it leaves me incredibly conflicted. On one hand, holy shit, this is peak fiction, and on the other hand, I'm still somewhat mixed on the execution. Despite having a longer runtime than usual, I still feel like they could have used an extra 10 to 20 minutes or so. Now don't get me wrong, it wraps up everything it can quite nicely, and has some of the greatest moments across the whole show. My Go Echo out here putting in overtime in that finale only for no one to say thank you. Jace and Victor get the most perfect ending they could have gotten, with some absolutely breathtaking visuals, and while I never expected Vi and Jinx to have a happy ending, this was not how I expected things to go. The two finally get to be sisters again for the final battle, but circumstances force Jinx to sacrifice herself, and it really hurts. Episode 9 is a thrilling ending, but it's mired with a lot of problems. Unfortunately, for as impressive as it was for the show to be carrying so much weight with such stride, they do lose their balance at the final hurdle. Not only is the pacing like lightning, it also doesn't feel like everything was done appropriate justice. Singed shows up for a couple of seconds with no dialogue. Maddie being revealed to be Ambessa's agent was not an unwelcome twist, but still felt like it came out of nowhere, and given how much of a nothing character she really is, the whole ordeal felt odd. Though I will give her props for having one of the funniest fucking deaths in all of fiction, get rolled and smoked, you homewrecker. Generally, it felt like there could have been less time focusing on the horrors of the war happening below, and more time dedicated to the plot. Plenty of plot moments happen during the war scenes, but a lot of them drag on, especially the beginning with Vi, and I feel that time could have been used elsewhere. After Echo saves the day, Jace and Victor make amends and fix everything, the episode enters this mad dash to finally end. We get a montage showing the new council, how everything is moving along, but after that, the episode just ends really abruptly, and it feels super weird. However, despite my many complaints, I strongly believe that the positives of this finale vastly outweigh the negatives. It's straight up some of the most epic and beautiful shit I've seen all year, and I'm incredibly happy that they managed to at least stick the landing without fumbling the bag. As much as I would have liked the show to have had more time to increase the emotional impact of everything that happens here, I can't deny that I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. But yeah, Arcane Season 2 is fantastic overall, even if it gets messier as it goes on. This is still a cut above above the majority of shows currently airing and streaming right now, and now that I've seen the finale, I feel more confident in calling this show one of my favorites. Arcane is pretty unbelievable. I still think it's crazy that a video game adaptation of League of Legends ended up being one of the greatest shows of the decade and one of the best animated shows of all time. My critiques of Season 2's pacing aside, this level of quality is rare not just among video game adaptations, but in television in general. There's only a handful of shows every decade that you can truly call exceptional, and have no issue of recommending to basically anyone. From how masterfully and naturally done its world building is, to the incredible characters who, regardless of their prior actions, you will always root for in some way, big or small, the stunning artwork and animation that consistently delivers movie-level visuals for every single episode that puts even the very best of Pixar to absolute shame, the phenomenal soundtrack and the ways it's utilized, all put to use in a morally and thematically complex narrative that immerses you in its world for 18 episodes straight while barely faltering. Again, I'm not a very hard person to impress, but Arcane is just a cut above most of the stuff I've been watching as of recently. Whether that's because of just how great it is or because of the amount of slop that gets churned out these days is up to you, but I have loved nearly every moment of this amazing series, and while Arcane may be over, Riot is just getting started with their League of Legends shows. There are so many more characters and locations and fascinating lore that I believe could result in a show that puts even this one to shame. I've grown fairly tired of the cinematic universe approach, if you could even call a TV show cinema. I can't and I will, but League absolutely gets a pass. An entire catalogue of breathtaking television set in the same world but taking place across all of its many locations and having so many different things to say sounds amazing. It'll be a long time before we get the next League show, but I hope they take what worked in Arcane and keep improving it for the next one. Maybe have more than 9 episodes per season next time, it would certainly help the pacing out a ton. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. I get this isn't in line with the majority of my content and was mostly just me gushing for about half an hour, but thank you regardless. Play Yakuza.